Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming here tonight, and welcome to the Bishopsgate Institute. I'm not sure if everybody has been here before. Have you ever been to the Bishopsgate Institute? It's a wonderful place, and the building itself is, of course, part of the Bishopsgate Conservation Area, and something which stands with Liverpool Street Station itself as part of the glories of this region. So my job is to simply say hello and act as a host here, and in a while to introduce you to people who know more about this than I do. They're experts, and they will take us through some of the details of the campaign so far, of the building and why they need to be preserved. So I'm going to be introducing Robert Thorne, who will be telling us, he's a historian, has written a history of Liverpool Street Station, and will tell us something of the origins and story of the station itself. Coco Whittaker, who'll be coming forward. She's the case officer from the 20th Century Society, and she'll be able to detail how what we see of the concourse today came to be, how that was built and what it means. And then Joe O'Donnell is the director of the Victorian Society, and he'll be talking a bit about the campaign and what we might be expecting to get from it. And Susan Ring is a solicitor, and she herself has recently, her most recent case was getting a nighttime injunction to stop Plymouth Council taking down any more of those trees, if you read about that. But she will be taking us through some of the legal aims of what we're trying to do in the battle ahead. I just wanted to sort of start by talking a little bit about my own journey to come here to Liverpool Street Station. And find myself as a sort of convener or president of the reconstituted LISSCA. Now, it was about 50 years ago that it was proposed to completely demolish Liverpool Street Station. And a committee was formed with Sir John Betjeman, and Spike Milligan was there, adding a bit of sort of comedy note to it as well, to try and prevent this happening. And they were successful. I think the members of that committee, some of whom I hope are actually here tonight, were probably horrified to realize that we had to spring into action again. I'm just going to try using oh, I'm pointing it in the wrong direction. So let's see. Oh, now we've jumped through. But what I wanted to do to start with was just try and explain a little bit about what is proposed. Because a few months ago, in April, when this began to be to raise its head, we went to visit the consultation, a sort of rather hurried thing that happened in a couple of weeks, and in a porter cabin just along towards the Broadgate end of the station. And when I visited there, I was really surprised to find how difficult it was in the presentation of the developer, sellers, and Network Rail to work out exactly what was being proposed. I'd learned this from Joe, but if I looked at their pictures, I couldn't quite get a grasp on it. All their pictures and all their talk was of the concourse, of the improvements that they would make to the life of the rail passenger, and the glittering and beautiful environment that they were preparing to and proposing to put before us. But actually, we had to look very hard to get the photographs to show the real intentions of this development. And this shows it quite clearly. You can see the former Great Eastern Hotel, the Andaz, just down there, really buried underneath what is are considerable. There's the hotel. And this structure is intended to be built directly on top of it. Now we suddenly jumped through a series of pictures, so I'll see if I can take us back a bit. Here's a shot of before and after, looking down Liverpool Street. And immediately we can see that this is the existing station as it was redeveloped. That building has been completely demolished in order to provide for 21 stories of new build on top. It's nearly 1 million square feet of office and hotel space that's intended to be brought to bear here. And one of the things that puzzled me is 1 million square feet in this day and age seems an extraordinary ambition, given that when I started to advertise this on Zoopla, on Instagram, I was instantly told by people who came to me, you should go on Zoopla. Go on Zoopla, Griff, and you'll see how many offices are currently advertised as being available in the Bishopsgate area. Now, the Corporation of London believes intrinsically, deep down, that it needs and has published that it will require 2,200,000 square meters of office to be built in the next 10 years or so. That's a colossal amount of space. Even if you allow a metre per person, that implies that they're expecting a further 2 million people to commute into the area of Bishopsgate somehow in the future. There's another report, though, one which I find a little bit more trustworthy, which says that it's estimated that the City of London is not going to reach the numbers that it had pre-COVID until at least 2030. So there's a long way to go before there's any particular necessity for so many new offices. However, it's not our job here really to engage with the Corporation of London on a sort of political level to ask questions about the future and whether a green city is a city that should waste so much of its energy bringing huge quantities of people into London to work for 6 to 8 hours to 12 hours, depending on their jobs, and then sending them back out to where they came from. But really, we have to ask ourselves whether the corporation is likely to say, go ahead because we need these offices. The corporation passes somewhere just short of 98% of planning applications. It makes it the highest in the country for just passing whatever is put in front of them. It doesn't mean that we, as a body, as a combined body, couldn't be able to try and influence the corporation, because, as you know, a battle was joined over Smithfield, and that battle was won. And it is important that we go to the corporation and try to persuade them, as the planning committee meets, as the alderman of this area, we need to get in contact with them and try and persuade them to understand that this project, such as it is one project too far. There are 11 skyscrapers already planned. We assume that these are going to be built on sites created by completely pulling down buildings that already exist and are seen to have passed their useful date. It's true as well that Arab and the London School of Economics have joined forces and produced a report which has told the City of London that the days of the big office, the trading floor, are finished, and that the new developments need to be Grade a listed office space. That means space which gives people room to spread out, space which is seen as luxury office space rather than serried ranks of desks like the apartment. But having said that, the process becomes guilty of being seen as a sort of construction for construction's sake form of growth. Inasmuch as these buildings become available, these new buildings, possibly of grade A offices, so firms will be persuaded that what they need is a brand new office and will move quickly from the old, slightly shabby offices they possess without bothering to recycle those offices and move into brand new ones, leaving the offices they have vacated to be presumably put on the list to be torn down and rebuilt later. It's a sort of antithesis of recycling. It's a sort of wasteful process and something that it's difficult to influence the current planning committee of the city to try and stop. We feel as we face this that the only way to do that is to gather our forces, to get as many people as possible, to get as much publicity as possible for what's going on, and try and turn it into something that becomes an issue. But we are dealing in the City of London with unelected representatives, or at least non-democratic representatives who are free to make their own choices, as it were, about what they feel is good for the growth of the city. What we want to emphasize, I think, with Liverpool Street Station is that this is not a derelict site. It's not a completely redundant building. It's not a useless piece of old concrete block that really needs refurbishing and another 10 stories put on the top of it. This is a working station that was brought to a fine state of refurbishment only 30 years ago. It seems to me that what we're talking about with Liverpool Street Station is a pretty unique case, and it needs to be singled out. There's often a sense, and we feel this with the developers' reaction to the idea that the Victorian Society and the other members of LISSCA who have got involved here and who number virtually every protection and conservation society in London. We have the 20th Century Society with us. We have the Georgian Society with us. We have SAVE. We have the John Betjeman Society. We have the Spitalfields Trust. It's honestly like a meeting of the five families. I've never known so many conservation bodies get together around one cause quite so swiftly and quite so fervently. And that's because this development is not a development which is saying we have a sort of redundant space. It's a development which relies on taking pushing the envelope, shall we say, of the conservation area and the listed building consent to its very limits. We can see by looking at the building that's happening on the right. Now, let's see if yes, you can see that it has been cantilevered over the former Great Eastern Hotel. Now, that hotel is grade 2 star listed. That cantilevering is like a swing bridge coming over the top of a conservation area. The conservation area stops on the other side of that hotel. The hotel is in the conservation area. But if we allow a principle that anybody who finds a conservation area a little bit bothersome can just sort of build out sideways, the buildings beneath it are not going to be unharmed as the developers are claiming. The buildings beneath it are going to be dwarfed, they're going to be swamped, they're going to be extinguished. So the real intention of Network Rail is to go in and, by licensing or selling what is in a Swiftian way called the airspace above these listed buildings and above the conservation area, a sort of extraordinary notion, without, as it were, quite touching them, that way they'll be able to pay for the very necessary upgrades to the station underneath. Now, there's a pattern here, a pattern that sellers have followed, and they're the developers. They are not themselves, as far as I understand it from information I've been given, they don't themselves end up owning the building they create as developers. On the contrary, what they do is gather money. Now, we have to be careful here because we call it foreign money, and it sounds as if we're being sort of vaguely sort of little Englishish about this, but it's not the point that it's foreign money, it's the fact that they gather huge sums of money from either Singapore or the Qataris or from America, I believe in this case, which are sort of invested into London to create the office space. In return, Network Rail relinquishes all control over those buildings. It's not as if Network Rail are saying with the Shard, look, here's the Shard, thanks for giving us the Shard, that will help to pay for our rail network. They relinquish all control over the Shard. It goes completely into Qatari hands. What they get in return is a spanking new railway station at London Bridge. But the difference between the Shard and the Cube at Paddington is those buildings were both built on adjacent land. This building doesn't have adjacent land, Liverpool Street Station. And so the only solution is to take a very narrow slot of what they're calling, this is non-Victorian buildings, knock it all down and come up on that narrow slot and then sort of expand sideways. And so the precedent that this is setting and the idea of what this means to conservation areas and to buildings generally is really frightening, I think. It's frightening to all conservation bodies and should be frightening, I hope, to the general public. But what's happening is a series of PR-based, peculiar and slightly what I would call at best disingenuous and at worst total fabrications to sort of push this development through. They include things like this will create 10,000 new jobs, whereas I think we can safely say that with 800,000 square feet of offices, it's most likely that most of those jobs will come from somewhere else, and they'll simply move to the new offices and, as I say, abandon the old ones. They claim that what they're doing is creating a sustainable building. And the actual act of building this building is so unsustainable and so green. The demolition itself is wasteful. That there's no element. It's sort of greenwashing of the most blatant kind. They claim that they will be helping the public realm by providing a swimming pool on top of the building. And I'm just moving on to try and have a look, and we can see, as we move through these pictures, we can see a picture of the concourse as proposed, but let's just look at the swimming pool and I'll come back to those in a second. I can find it, there we are. So there's a small swimming pool, and we've just got to hope that the 80 million people who use Liverpool Street Station every day don't decide all to go for a swim at the very same time. It's such an improbable sprig of holly on a concrete Christmas pudding, that the idea that this is a sort of gift to the world, it was sucked up entirely by the Sun, who triumphed, who crowed about this idea and said they're trying to stop us having a swimming pool in Bishopsgate. But perhaps the most complicated thing for us to fight is the idea that the station is in desperate need of reform and is in desperate need of improvement. And the only way that that can be achieved is by allowing the building of this colossal edifice on top of it. As I say, when we went to the consultation, when we tried to find out the details, the photographs of the actual building itself were difficult to find. This is the sort of photograph we were constantly confronted with. There were dozens and dozens, and will be if you go and search online, of these photographs of the improvements, supposed improvements, to the I'm starting again. Okay, supposed improvements to the concourse, but this is the concourse as it stands, and it's a spacious, airy, light-filled, brilliant achievement, built and finished only a few years ago, and I would have said capable of being reformed and remade if some of the urgent needs are articulated. The two that come up all the time, and they are only two, are more lifts and more escalators, so that it becomes a step-free station. If we look at that concourse, not having much, there we are. We can see that there are steps at the moment, but we can also, without too much imagination, imagine that it might be possible to put escalators in there or even lifts in there without wholly compromising the ideas of the original architects, British Rail architects, who made a fantastic job taking the idea of the train sheds and moving them to cover the concourse. Now, they've put a costing on this, and the developers have said that they're going to be pouring £450 million worth of improvements into the station as a result of what they're building. And we've sort of examined how those costs work out. The costs of the escalators, I think, are costed at about 12 million. The costs of the lifts are calculated at about 11 million. The rest of the money is being spent on refurbishing the rest of the concourse in ways which we can see in the pictures. No, we can't. No, there we are. Yeah, which we can see in the pictures that they are providing. We don't know how much of the 200 million, which is left wonderfully vague as just sort of building costs, is actually going to provide a foundation to hold up 21 stories of office block. But I think our contention is that it would be feasible for Network Rail to undertake the improvements, to upgrade, if you like, in terms of escalators and lifts and access this concourse without necessarily selling the airspace and the whole of Liverpool Street Station to be covered by what appears to be a sort of gigantic hat. So to fill us in a little bit more on the history of the station and how it has been effectively preserved over the years, I'm going to ask Robert Thorne to join now, and he will tell you a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Fine. Come on. This machine is not responding to my desires. Now we're going the wrong way now. Ah, here we go. Good. That's me and so on. Good evening, friends. Many of you will have at your bedsides a wonderful book by an American architect called Stuart Brand called How Buildings Learn, which is basically a book about the life cycle of buildings. And what you take away from that book is the realization that all buildings, whether it be our own houses or an office building, or indeed a church or a civic building, go through a cycle. And the cycle normally goes roughly like this. After 30 years, roughly 30 years, a building will need some kind of refurbishment. In our own homes, you know, a new stair carpet, replacing the washing machine, this kind of thing. But not much more than that. After 50 years, you have to have a slightly bigger rethink. You may need to rewire. You may need, in a bigger building, to install new kinds of servicing and air conditioning and so on. And then after 100 years, you probably reach a stage of having a fundamental rethink about the building and whether it should enter into another cycle at all or be demolished and replaced. Now, I mention all these three cycles, 30, 50, 100 years, because they're intensely relevant to the story of Liverpool Street. So we go back to 1974, when, as Griff mentioned, there was a proposal to demolish the whole of the Liverpool Street Station and the adjoining Broad Street Station, and build a new station beneath an incredibly banal office development by an architectural firm called Fitzroy Robinson. And a campaign was put together to object to this scheme. It called itself LISSCA, as we call ourselves today. And the success of the objections led to the project being subject to a public inquiry. I come before you as someone who actually helped prepare evidence for that public inquiry. So this is literally a kind of deja vu event for me. I was then working for the Greater London Council of fond memory. And we were, this is extraordinary thought, this was London's strategic government acting as the principal objector to the proposals. And that led to, as I say, the public inquiry, which took place over the winter of 76 to 77, and led to a decision about a year later. Now, at that public inquiry, the case that we and our friends at LISSCA put together was like this. We claimed that this station was a wonderful station. It had recently been listed in 1975, and yet that it had many, many drawbacks. It was muddled and confusing. And I owe it to you to once again admit what those confusing aspects were. And that really does take you straight into the history. I won't dwell too much on this, but to say that Liverpool Street was built by the Greater Eastern Railway, who wanted to push their railway tracks closer to the centre of the city. They'd been stopping their trains at Bishopsgate before. And through so doing, bring people closer to the city and also make a link, which was never fully used, with the underground. So there was actually a track running from the station into the Circle line. when they built this station in 1873 to 5, they built it according to what was the best thinking at the time about station layout, which was that you would be handling two totally different kinds of traffic. There would be mainline traffic, long trains, which needed long platforms, and most of the passengers on which would pour off and want cabs. So you had to have a cab rank and a cab ramp to bring the passengers up into the street. And on the other hand, there would be suburban trains which would come into short platforms and would be populated by people who knew exactly where they were going. They wouldn't take a cab, they'd walk straight out and go to their offices and places of employment. So immediately you generated an L-shaped station, which was with the long arm for the long trains and the short arm for the suburban trains. And all of this was below ground because in order to get into the center of the city, they had to come in under the existing streets. So you see in this image, we're looking across what was created. You see right in the foreground there, one of the long trains, and in the background, if you look beyond the wonderful clock, you see the short trains and the concourse that was above the buffer stops. And at the front of the station, they built a Gothic hotel still on an, come on, little thing. Doesn't want to show us Gothic buildings. Come on. There we go. They built an L-shaped Gothic building, and you can see there the cabs coming out, and you can see the route into the suburban station on the left with its separate ticket office. There is no, I don't think you can get round the fact that this was inherently going to be confusing. And it, of course, became more and more confusing as the difference between suburban traffic and mainline traffic grew closer and closer, and everyone wanted to catch roughly the same kind of trains. Now, the key thing about this station, quite apart from its layout, was its roof. And this is why we were able to say in 1976, come on, little thing. There we go. Whoops, no, I don't want to show you that. There we go. No. I want to show you the magnificent, Coco will come next, the magnificent roof and the relationship between the 1875 part of the station and its extension. The roof, which you see many images of already, and which you are familiar with as users of Liverpool Street, was designed by the railway's engineer, Edward Wilson, and he conceived of it not as an arched structure like Paddington or St. Pancras or King's Cross, but as a series of cantilever brackets on very tall cast iron columns which supported trusses. And these were formed into 2 naves and 2 aisles. So you already got a cathedral imagery working here. And one part of the nave and 1 aisle went over the mainline tracks, 1 part of the nave and 1 other aisle went over the suburban tracks. And the concourse ran across, as I've mentioned, exactly as a transept in a cathedral. And so you've got these extraordinary views across the station and across the roofs and a complex iron structure. This station had to be expanded in the 1890s, and additional 9 platforms were added on with a less interesting roof. And this was built towards Bishopsgate. And of course, that doubled the degree of confusion about the station because, as this view reminds you, you've then had to climb over the mainline trains in order to get from one part of the station to the other. Railway lovers loved this for the opportunity it gave you to look down on trains and do train spotting and so on, but it was completely infuriating to most railway users, particularly people trying to catch trains when they were late. So we had a station which was wonderful in its engineering and particularly in its roofs, in the light and the sense of space that was generated by Edward Wilson's roof, but which was utterly confusing. Very quickly about the hotel. The hotel was also built in 2 stages. First of all, the big block on Liverpool Street, designed by Charles Barry's son in a Flemish Renaissance style, with the principal entrance on Liverpool Street. You went in there, as you can still do today, and you went down to the staircase and the grand dining room, famous for its antique marmalade, and then you could go up to your bedrooms. In the 1890s, that was also extended, as the station had been, to fill in the little gap left by the extension of the station. It was extended by an architect called Colonel Edis, who imitated this Flemish Renaissance style again and built a sequence of really very interesting hotel rooms. Every drinker in the city knows the Hamilton Hall, which is now the Wetherspoons, but you can still spot Edis's work in there. But there are other very fine rooms surviving in the hotel, which is now listed at grade 2 star, as Griff has emphasized. So we awaited the result of the public inquiry, and the result was handed down by Peter Shaw, and he, the then Minister for the Environment, in 1979. The wheels move slowly. And the result was that the great engineered roof of the original station, that is the 1870s station, should be retained. It could be modified by siting off part of its longer bit, but most of the roof should be retained. And the rest of the development could proceed. Now, what I need to emphasize here is that result, although it took well over a year to come out, was the result of actual negotiation that took place during the public inquiry. We hear a lot about conflict resolution nowadays in our sad times. What happened, and I remember this very clearly, is that there was an agreement reached in the room during the public inquiry that this would be the ideal solution, that you could work round the most wonderful aspect of the station. I emphasize that because it suggests that ultimately there was a way of bringing sense and logic into the project. The hotel was not then threatened, I have to emphasize. The result of that negotiated agreement was the works to the station that we see today, the works which are done by Nick Derbyshire and his team for the British Railways Board, and which Coco is going to describe in more detail. And they were finished in 1992. And then 4 years later, works were undertaken to the hotel with Mansell Associates to bring that up to date. And they were, in a sense, just as intelligent and sympathetic as the work that Nick Derbyshire had done. They took the hotel by the scruff of the neck and created a logic to its layout which has never existed by installing a new atrium entrance on the angle of Liverpool Street, refurbishing the principal rooms, renewing the marmalade in the dining room, and handing it down to us today. Now, it's interesting, isn't it, to come back to what Stuart Brand was writing about in his great book, How Buildings Learn. He writes in that, age plus adaptability is what makes a building loved. Well, Liverpool Street has got the age, it's proved itself, both the station and the hotel, to have that adaptability. And the crucial thing is that those changes took place, particularly the changes to the station, roughly within that 100-year time period that you expect a building to undergo a major renewal. And what is implied in referring to that is that the expectation, I have an expectation, most sensible people have the expectation that buildings will be renewed, that they will be renewed in a sensible and logical way, answering to the necessities of a new society as it has grown over those subsequent 100 years. They will not be renewed after only 30 years on a scale and in a completely, utterly insensitive way that is now proposed. I hand over to Coco.
Hello, hi. So I'm Coco. I'm here on behalf of the 20th Century Society. There we go. And I'm going to give you a kind of quick 10-minute walk over the sort of 20th century additions to the station and to the hotel. So this is Liverpool Street Station, and here, so this is Liverpool Street Station, and here is Broad Street Station, as they once were. And we've heard about the threat the station faced in the 1970s when British Rail came forward with plans to completely demolish the station, and how campaigners fought hard to save the building and to secure its listing. And this was a huge win for heritage and ensured that this important 19th century station was protected. So what we as the 20th Century Society are interested in is what happened next. So first, I'm going to just sort of show you what existed on the site before the rebuilding. So as Robert's just explained, the Victorian station, as built in 1875, had two main components. It had an L-shaped office range here, belonging to the Great Eastern Railway to the south of the site. It had so its northern arm, which is this building here, had a clock tower to Liverpool Street, and the spire of that was lost in World War II. And then this area here was open and accommodated the kind of links through to the booking office in the Northern Range. Then the Victorian station extended behind that and here. So this bit, this sort of section here from 1875, keep saying 1975. And then this was the Eastern train shed here, which was the extension that Robert mentioned that was added in the 1890s. And then here, of course, is the Great Eastern Hotel. Cool. So after the station's listing in 1975, the Greater London Council put pressure on British Rail to draw up a new scheme to extend and upgrade the station, but involving, the greater retention of the historic 19th century architecture. And so British Rail came forward with a proposal which was put together by their own architects group, and that was directed by Nick Derbyshire, who worked with the project architect Alistair Lansley. And Alistair Lansley was the principal architect working on the St Pancras scheme, so converting that for Eurostar. So the hotel was retained, as was the Victorian Western train shed, which you can see here. Oh. Hotel here, Western train shed here. But planners permitted the demolition of the late 19th century Eastern train shed, which was here, in order to lengthen the platforms, and the Great Eastern Railway offices were also demolished, again, to allow platforms to be extended and allow for the creation of a unified concourse. So this demolition was considered sort of necessary to carry out the improvements to the operation of the station, but the essential kind of 19th century core was retained. Oh, slow, this one. No. I can say next slide if that's a bit easier. Yeah, that's the one. So thank you. Once the demolition had taken place, British Rail's architects set to work rebuilding the station. And what was really remarkable about this work was how conservation-led it was. So the retained parts of the Victorian station were restored, and the new additions borrowed from the design of the Victorian station and then tried to enhance what remained of it. The architects restored the Victorian Western train shed, reinstating some of the lost details, and then they carefully extended it and created a new concourse here. And then they carefully replicated. Oh, sorry, hang on, I've jumped forward in my notes. So they created this new concourse. Then they built new entrances here and over here off the picture in this Victorian revival style. And they rebuilt the end of the office range, which is here. And I'll come to this in a bit more detail in a second. And I don't think I mentioned actually, but so they built the concourse and then they extended the train shed with this building here. So next slide. So this photograph shows the work progressing to the new extended train shed and concourse. The architects didn't design a kind of straightforward shed-like or generic modern extension, but they allowed themselves to be directed by the architecture on the site. So they borrowed the form of the 1875 transept of the Western train shed, which if you go back a slide, sorry. So this is the original transept running along here. They borrowed that to create this new concourse here. And if you go forward a slide again, sorry. And then they carefully replicated the form of the 1870s roof trusses and walls to extend the station. And it's a really remarkable project in the history of conservation practice. And they really managed to sort of preserve and enhance the Victorian character of the space. If you go to the next slide. So here you can see on the right, the kind of mock-up roof trusses that they produced. And it shows the efforts the architects went to replicate and continue the forms of the 1870s train shed. So as you can see here, they really carefully kind of imitated the decorative pierced cast iron spandrels in the extension. Next slide. So, and here's the completed concourse as it was published at the time. While the architects sort of continued the Victorian Gothic of the train shed to build the envelope of the extension and the concourse, they added this gallery of shops designed in a kind of contemporary high-tech style from steel and glass. And just to pause and point out here the kind of remarkable detailing of the extension. So the architects replicated these column capsules perfectly. So in the Victorian station, that detailing at the top of the column had been removed in the 50s because of deterioration. But the architects in the 80s reinstated those details, and then they replicated them in the extension that they produced. So it was all very sort of precise and conservation led. If you go to the next slide, this is 50 Liverpool Street, which was one of the 1870s offices that was demolished, and then it was rebuilt in the 80s in facsimile. And the next slide gives a bit more context to that. So it shows the 1870s offices prior to demolition, and then a drawing on the right of the rebuilt number 50. And there's something interesting about the way that the architects presented their work in the 80s. I mean, this drawing makes it look like a Victorian scheme. I think it shows their kind of interest in the history and in the kind of style and making it really period appropriate. So next slide shows you the new entrance to Liverpool Street. And when this was finished, the building design, this journal called the entrance, said it was built in a full-blooded Victorian style. And you can see how it's very carefully thought through. So these tops of the towers here, they pick up on those found on Great Eastern Hotel. So it's sort of communicating with its environment and being quite responsive to the streetscape. And the next drawing shows, next slide, sorry, shows a drawing of the new entrance to Bishopgate, which was again in that kind of Victorian style, but with a sort of a steel and glass canopy coming out. And the next slide shows them together. And you have these replica Victorian clock faces. And then you have these carved Baroque, what they're called cartouches, which were taken from the demolished station facade to Bishopsgate, dating from the 1890s. So a lot of this work was also incorporating fabric from the demolished parts of the station and sort of including it in the new build to have that history and continuity. The next slide turns to the Great Eastern Hotel, which was built from the 1880s, again in phases. And in its heyday in the Victorian period, it was an incredibly grand and impressive building. But fast forward 100 or so years, and it was in a state of neglect. And in 1995, it was acquired by the Arcadian International Hotel Group and the Conran Group. And the new owners appointed the architects Manser Associates, led by Jonathan Manser, to carry out this major refurbishment and extension. And the Manser team worked with the engineers Alan Baxter's and with the Conran Design Partnership on the hotel's interiors. So that practice is the practice of Terence Conran, who is a very well-known designer who sadly passed away recently. But it was a great team working on the refurbishment. So part of the work involved the removal of the Victorian Hotel's original mansard roof, which is this part up here. And its replacement with a more substantial 3-story mansard roof, which significantly increased the number of bedrooms provided by the hotel. And this new extension, which you see here, added in the 90s, was lightweight, so it was steel and timber construction, and that was carefully designed so as not to put too much pressure and weight on the foundations of the Victorian hotel. And it was set within the original stone parapet, so you see that running along here. And it was covered in hand-cut copper shingles, so tiles, which are laid diagonally in this kind of diamond pattern. And because they were copper, they were expected to patinate and change color over time. So the architects, when they were designing, were thinking about how this building would age and how it would relate to the streetscape in years to come. And the original stone dormers here were retained and restored, and new windows were fitted into them. And then a row of new sort of barrel-shaped windows were added at the higher level. And these round windows were apparently reminiscent of Broad Street Station, so referencing the history of the site as it was. And then they added new chimney stacks, which are purely stylistic. They have no function. And then each floor of this extension was curved and then sort of set back so that it limited the impact of the new addition on the hotel and on the streetscape. And we feel that this is a really interesting and sort of creative, carefully engineered addition to the hotel, and was really informed by a thorough understanding of the building's structural capacities, but also by its historic character. So if you go to the next slide. So I haven't got an illustration of this, but Mansa is a practice well known for their cutting edge modernist steel and glass buildings. And their initial designs for the extension included this sort of box-like glazed addition that sort of sat on the top. But we were told by Jonathan Mansa that that was discarded in favor of this more sort of site-sensitive design. And that was the kind of a result of discussions with the planners and sort of back and forth until they arrived at this point. And it's really shown very green here because of that expected patination to the copper. So for the next slide, just to briefly explain some of the changes that Mansa made to the hotel's interiors with Conran. So there were, with the original hotel, there were reportedly problems with the lack of a clear entrance, with bedrooms overlooking noisy streets or light wells, and a really complicated circulation system. So Mansa and the team addressed that by relocating the entrance to be separate from the restaurants. You can see that here. This is the before on the left and the solution on the right. And then they worked with the existing building to create a new double height entrance lobby and a full height atrium, which they managed to achieve by sort of opening up the light wells and inserting that through into that space. And a new circular light well was then kind of cut through the building. And then the bedrooms were threaded in a figure of 8 around those new spaces. And Mansa and Conran also did valuable work, sort of carefully restoring original rooms in the hotel that were kept. In the next slide, you can see the atrium as they designed it, and they installed this sort of high-tech lift shaft and light well into that space. And then aside from this addition, their work was generally quite light touch. And then the additions they did make like this were very high quality. So the next slide just shows you the kind of new listing. So Historic England very recently upgraded the entire hotel to grade 2 star, which is a really high listing grade. And that includes, technically includes the Mansa additions that were made to the building. And in terms of the station, they have listed the late 20th century extension to the train shed and listed the new concourse. So they are now protected with grade 2 listing. But they've excluded the 20th century station entrances from that listing. In the next slide, this is the applicant's proposed roof plan. The red parts are kind of showing the areas for demolition. So if the current scheme gets approval, we stand to lose Mansa's inventive and considered additions to the hotel, a really sizable chunk of the grade 2 listed 20th century train shed extension, and the entire concourse, which is also listed. And the 20th century station entrances would also go. And while these are unlisted, we strongly believe that these contribute to the character and to the historic interest of the site and do have their own heritage value. And this amount of demolition would really, we feel, result in the loss of the important late 20th century history of the station's renewal, and in the needless loss, really, of high quality station architecture. And that's why we're getting involved in supporting the campaign to oppose these plans. And now I think I'd hand over to Joe.
Well, thank you, Coco. Hopefully the clicker might work for me, but I'm not going to take my chances. So Ruth, if you stand by. So yeah, as has already been said, I'm Joe O'Donnell and I'm Director of the Victorian Society. And I've been helping to run the campaign since we launched it last year. But I've been fighting this battle for some time before that. And I'm absolutely determined that we will win and stop these absurd plans. But we need your help and your donations to do it. So if you've got connections that can help us, they're just as vital as well. We need everything that you can give to help us win this David and Goliath battle. Because I was so determined that we would win, I decided that we should reform the LISSCA campaign, which had been so successful in the 70s, as Robert's already set out. Because I knew this was going to be the planning fight of the century so far. We've achieved real unanimity across the sector because we all know it won't just be this one scheme. If these plans go ahead, it would set an absolutely terrible precedent, seriously undermining heritage protection. If you demolish this listed building and put a tower through and over a Grade 2 star building in a conservation area, why not over St. Paul's itself? It sounds ridiculous, and it should be ridiculous, but it's the same heritage protection legislation that's protecting Liverpool Street Station that is protecting St. Paul's. And all our heritage buildings up and down the country that are built on valuable city centre land. We know, because they've told me, that Network Rail is already looking at plans for Waterloo Station and Victoria Station. What it gets away with at Liverpool Street Station, it will try there next. So the thrust of my campaign, my talk this evening, is going to be looking at what we've been doing on the campaign and kind of pulling together some of the kind of difficulties and interesting moments we've faced. So the Victorian Society had been hearing rumours about plans for Liverpool Street for quite a long time. I wrote to the chair and the CEO of Network Rail, inviting them to discuss the plans with us at an early stage to make sure that what they came up with was sensitive and built on the work that had been done in the 80s and 90s. I didn't hear back. I chased multiple times, and I finally got a response on the day that a press release was issued announcing the scheme as we've all seen it. It was worse than anything that I could have imagined from the rumours. Partial demolition and a tower over the hotel, knocking through the ballroom at the hotel as well. We did get some meetings, but the consultation was laughable. Network Rail refused to release options appraisals for any other less harmful schemes that it might have considered. Its position was very much, well, we're not knocking the whole thing down again, you should be grateful. What was most shocking, though, is we found out that this version of the scheme has been under consideration for at least 4 years, but at no point was, in that period, was there any public consultation? Or was there any attempt to engage the heritage world, who had fought the successful battle in the 70s, which resulted in the scheme which Coco demonstrated responds to the Victorian heritage exceptionally well. The Victorian Society and others applied to get the listing of the station and the hotel updated, and we were successful, as Coco pointed out. I hoped that that would be the end of this scheme, that once the train shed was listed and the hotel upgraded to Grade 2 star, that such a harmful scheme would have absolutely no chance of being approved by the city, and that Network Rail would go back to the drawing board. I was wrong. Instead, they doubled down, absurdly claiming that a scheme which demolished parts of listed buildings and went over the top of the Grade 2 star hotel didn't harm heritage. it was clear that they fundamentally didn't see the listed building and the exceptionally high work that we've been seeing here as having heritage or having value. So if we move to my first slide, I think this helps show just how valued this work is, in fact, because what that shows is just some random members of the public when I was there, really engaging with it. They're there having their photo taken with this piece of work because they think it's a great building. They want that. They think, okay, I want to remember London with this building as it is. I think what's interesting is that they didn't choose to take a photo outside one of the nondescript buildings nearby, like Network Rail is proposing to build there. Can we move to the second slide, please, Ruth? I started getting increasingly annoyed at the amount of misinformation that was being publicized as benefits of the scheme, and the lack of information that we were able to get out from Network Rail. It simply wasn't acting as I would expect a government's arm-length body managing public assets to act. I knew that there was already a scheme in progress to restore the Victorian train shed roofs. Yet this was being bandied about as a benefit of this huge tower, as a reason why this tower should go ahead. So next slide, please, Ruth. So I decided to make a freedom of information request to the Department for Transport to try and establish and really pin down, since I couldn't do it with Network Rail, what exactly was being paid for by this scheme and what public benefits would be provided. The response I got was actually shocking. £11 million is already going to be spent on improving passenger experience and increasing capacity at the station. 21 extra ticket gates will be created, and there will be rationalization of retail spaces to allow passengers to move more easily through the station. And contrary to what we've been told by Network Rail, proposals for further works would be considered by the government. I was now extremely dubious about the claims that were being made, and especially the urgent need for the scheme to go ahead now. There's been a huge fall in passengers during COVID, which we haven't yet recovered from fully. The Elizabeth line, another transport project which had millions of pounds on it, one of the benefits of which was to reduce the numbers of passengers who have to get off the train at Liverpool Street, cross the concourse, and then go down into the tube station. The impact of that had yet to be seen or understood, and yet the government said in its response that that vital information on passenger numbers would only be available, interim information would only be available at the start of 2024. How can Network Rail decide to go ahead with the project, or the city decide on an application that would totally trash heritage based on passenger flows when the initial findings haven't even been published? Fourth slide, please, Ruth. We continued our discussions with Network Rail, and I had a meeting with its chair, Sir Peter Hendy. They rejected the proposal that we put to them that instead of trashing Liverpool Street, which is a very heritage-sensitive site, it should instead develop other sites in its portfolio where there would be no harm to heritage at all. And that could be used to fund any further accessibility improvements needed that weren't already being paid for. We were told that the government had forbidden Network Rail from doing this, and instead it had been ordered to maximize income from every single site it owned, no matter the harm. Lord Carrington kindly submitted some written questions for us to test this out. As you can see, the government denies that such a policy exists. Therefore, there is, in fact, nothing to stop Network Rail building elsewhere to pay for any extra lifts or escalators that might be needed, or indeed from applying to the government for or grant bodies to get that extra funding as well. Slide 5, please, Ruth. Adding in the few extra lifts or escalators, which might be needed once the work that's already been paid for by the government is finally completed, would cause nowhere near the level of harm that this huge tower and rebuilding the entire station is going to do. Network Rail indicated that they're estimating it might be 10 years of passenger disruption for extremely minor benefits for the public and passengers, not to mention that the concourse is going to be roofed over and placed into semi-artificial light, the kind of cathedral of light we have at the moment being totally a distant memory. You would think that Network Rail would have fully explored all these opportunities for funding and achieving its aims before pressing ahead with such a harmful scheme, but obviously not. Next slide, please, Ruth. You can see here at the top an image of Hither Green Station, which is a suburban station in southeast London in, I think, Zone 3. And if you see at the top there, there's a big horizontal line going across the tracks, and that entire bridge structure is going to be created at Hither Green, and there will be 4 new lifts. And I just think it's really interesting to highlight that obviously Network Rail and the government feel able to make that level of investment at Hither Green, but they've obviously decided that Liverpool Street issues aren't so bad that it needs to make that investment itself. So that's a flavour of some of the difficulties and some of the issues that we've been looking at. But there's some questions which I haven't been able to get to the bottom of as yet. For example, how much income is Network Rail making from the retail that it already has in Liverpool Street Station? Over the decades, it must have made quite a substantial sum from renting out shops and the iconic McDonald's building there. If improving passenger accessibility is really that urgent, why has it not put this rental income to that task? It's had the money coming in. It's chosen not to. It's deciding instead to cause huge inconvenience to passengers and trash heritage. But there's more questions. I mean, who will, as Griff's already touched on, who will own this tower at the end? Who will be getting the rental from all this new office space? It's still shrouded in mystery, and it's just not what you would expect from a government arms length body to have this level of mystery from such a major development in the centre of London. Slide 7, please, Ruth. I want to finish by addressing what I think in some of our conversations Network Rail has seen as perhaps its killer point, that the station must be redeveloped because it regularly has to close due to overcrowding. This are some images from London Bridge Station, and you can see there that there's been multiple times this year where it has been dangerously overcrowded and people have been really in fear. And I think I can't remember the Liverpool Street getting headlines like that any time recently. But what it demonstrates is that despite the millions of pounds that has been spent on rebuilding London Bridge Station, it still faces overcrowding issues. A brand new station has not resolved that. Network Rail says that Liverpool Street Station has to be closed to overcrowding because it's no longer fit for purpose or the number of people using it. I think London Bridge shows that a new station will face the same issues. Even if the Network Rail decides to leverage millions of pounds of investment, decides to totally trash our heritage, setting a terrible nationwide precedent, and inflict 10 years of misery on passengers. the overcrowding will remain. This is because the real reason that both Liverpool Street Station and London Bridge Station experience dangerous overcrowding is not related to station design. It's due to what happens on the railways. If the trains aren't running and thousands of people can't get home, then any station will suffer from overcrowding. London Bridge is our newest station and it still suffers from this problem. Rebuilding Liverpool Street won't solve overcrowding if there are no trains to be had. So I'll just reiterate the kind of call that Griff made at so I think we really need your help, and I'm going to hand over to Susan and she's going to set out just why we need you to chip in every little bit that you possibly can.
If you could perhaps click on, that would be helpful rather than using this. That might right. Oh, that's me. So I'm Susan Ring. I'm a partner in the firm of Harrison Grant Ring Solicitors. And I'm going to take you a very quick paddle through the choppy legal waters of objecting to this development. So if I could have the next slide, please. Next slide, please. So where we've got to so far is that the Victorian Society has sent a call-in letter to the Secretary of State asking for him, currently Michael Govey, to call in the application for his own decision. We've seen that the City of London sort of overwhelmingly grants planning applications when they come before them. And actually Michael Gove has had made some good decisions recently, including Save's Marks and Spencer case. So, you know, that's a route that would make more sense. It meets all the calling criteria for call-in. And if this was called in at an early stage, we wouldn't then have to go through all the objection stage before the City of London Planning Committee. So that could save costs. Next slide, please. If call-in is refused by the Secretary of State, there is an option to judicially review that decision. That probably wouldn't be the prime target, but that's a potential. And we would ask the planning court to quash the refusal of the call-in. Just a quick, well, Aarhus Convention, that's probably a bit technical, but it means that in environmental cases, which this would be, costs are limited to enable access to justice. So say LISSCA or the Victorian Society or whoever brought the proceedings, as an organisation, their costs would be limited to £10,000 if they lost. That's in respect of the other side's cost, the Secretary of State's costs. So, and just generally in terms of costs of judicial review, I put up there, you're looking at £35,000 to £50,000 plus VAT if for your own costs of bringing a judicial review. And obviously you can recover those if you're successful from the other side, from the Secretary of State in that case, but you're limited in an Aarhus Convention case to 35,000. So just as it provides protection for your own cost, for your exposure to the other side's costs, the other side also gets some protection as well. Next slide, please. So if call-in is refused, the matter goes before the Planning Committee of the City of London, then and they grant planning permission, then you're looking at a judicial review of their decision to grant planning permission. The remedy would be that the planning court would quash the decision, quash the permission, and it would then go for reconsideration. And one would hope then that the decision would be reconsidered in a lawful manner. Again, an Aarhus Convention claims so cost protection to provide access to justice. I've put the same there. That's the same general cost of your own cost and your liability to the other side. Have the next slide, please. Right. Well, this would be good. The City of London refuses planning permission. So in that scenario, the planning applicants, who are Mersey One Limited, which is a relatively recent company, and Network Rail Infrastructure Limited, they have the right to appeal to the Secretary of State. So that would be dealt with at a planning inquiry, and then the planning inspector would write a report following the planning inquiry, and decide whether or not to grant planning permission. In fact, the Secretary of State could recover that so that Michael Gove could read the report and then say, do I agree with the inspector's recommendations or not? And, you know, has been known to not follow the inspector's recommendations. So that's if I suppose the unlikely situation where the planning committee refuses planning permission. Next slide, please. This is the most likely scenario. There will be a planning inquiry either because Michael Gove's called in the decision. He's agreed to the Victorian Society's request that he decide this and it not go to the planning committee, or there's been a refusal by the planning committee. So either way, a planning inquiry is likely, I would say. Next slide, please. So in that scenario, how would LISSCA, the amenity groups, what role would they play? They would be able to apply for Rule 6 status. So that means they'd be considered a main party with the appellant and with the decision, with the appellant and with the local authority. They'd be entitled to appear at the inquiry and to cross-examine other parties. And they would, as a result of being a main party, they would themselves have to submit a statement of case, comment on a statement of ground, provide proofs of evidence, and be represented very ideally by a planning barrister. I can't really see how that wouldn't happen without a planning barrister. Next slide, please. And then this sort of comes to the nitty-gritty of it, the costs. I've put 6-day inquiry. It's actually going to be likely to be quite a lot more than that, but I suppose one could limit the number of days that the planning barrister needed to be at the inquiry for the amenity societies for LISSCA. But you're looking at upwards of £30,000 plus VAT. Yeah, that would be for a 6-day inquiry, be obviously more for a 10-day inquiry, probably more likely. Experts, I think you'd be looking at transport, I think looking at numbers coming into Liverpool Street, a planning consultant, heritage obviously, but that might be able to be done in-house. But you're looking very roughly at £10,000 to £15,000 plus VAT for each expert to appear at the inquiry. And then they probably want some solicitor assistance to deal with case management, and I would sort of estimate up to 50 hours. I mean, that sounds a lot, but it's actually quite realistic and probably a bit conservative. Next slide, please. So ideal scenario, planning permission refused following the planning inquiry. So the planning applicants could apply to for a statutory review of that of refusal of planning permission, which is a bit like a judicial review. You've got, it would have to be that the inspector or the Secretary of State had somehow erred in law. It wouldn't be a rehearing of the merits of the case. And there's a strictly 6-week time limit for them, for the applicants to apply following the refusal of planning permission by the Secretary of State. And if the Amenity Society's LISSCA had appeared as a Rule 6 party, they'd probably want to get involved in that statute review to make sure there's no backsliding by the Secretary of State in defending those proceedings. And again, Aarhus Convention costs are available. Next slide, please. If planning permission granted, not ideal, not what would be wanted, but the Rule 6 parties, it's not the end of the road. They could apply themselves for a statutory review. Again, as I've explained in the previous slide, again, it's have to be a strictly 6-week time limit. Review is on the basis of errors of law. Remedy would be a quashing of the grant of planning permission, and then there would have to be either it would depend on what basis the permission was quashed, but there might have to be a fresh planning inquiry or an inquiry limited to looking at certain issues where the inspector or the Secretary of State had gone wrong. And again, the same sorts of costs, and it's an Aarhus Convention case. And I think that's the end of the slides. So that was a very quick canter through. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And before, we mustn't get into a state of, it's just to show what a lengthy and protracted business fighting unnecessary developments can be. Why, you've been very patient, and thank you for listening to all those aspects. I feel very much that with the public meeting, it's very important that people say what they feel as well at this stage. So if there are people with questions or people who want to stand forward and say anything or ask questions of the panel or even of other members of the audience here, do put up a hand and we'll try and facilitate that to happen. Yes, we'll bring you a microphone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. On the as far as the legal costs are concerned, what's the total estimate? I mean, you mentioned 50 hours, but you didn't actually mention the hourly rate and therefore what that would be. So at the worst case scenario, what's the likely total cost for LISSCA, excluding, I mean, yeah, ignoring any recovery of costs and so on? Thank you.
Susan, do you have an answer to that?
Is it working? No.
Yes.
Yes. I think you'd be looking at an hourly rate of something like £190 plus VAT. I mean, maybe less, but could do a deal. And I didn't get the last bit of that. What's the overall? I mean, in a plan, I probably should have said in a planning inquiry, each side bears their own costs, so there's no prospect of recovering costs from the other side in a planning inquiry unless a main party has done something very unreasonable, and it doesn't happen very often. But I don't know. I mean, say they just didn't actually turn up. That might be a reason to and the other side has had to produce evidence to deal with what they said they were going to do. That might be unreasonable behavior. But yeah, so there's no recovery of costs of a planning inquiry, but obviously there are on judicial review and statutory review.
So, what would you say was the total amount that we need to raise?
Of the planning inquiry?
No, we are just
In
to go
total?
forward. We've started a fund. Marie, are you there? Can you tell me how much we have in that fund at the moment?
Over £21,000.
So we have started and we've bruited this about. And so far, this has come off the internet and from people helping. And we put in a little bit ourselves and we've raised 21,000. So with some pro bono work and perhaps doubling that sum, we should be able to go forward and fight that, we hope, that challenge. Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that gets you a long way on the judicial review.
Yeah.
Hopefully you don't need to do the judicial review, or just going to the planning inquiry. The planning inquiry, as I say, you're probably looking at 30,000 plus VAT upwards for your barrister, 15,000 plus VAT for each expert, and then 50 hours at say 190 quid. I haven't done the maths on that one.
No, okay. But we're looking, if we can perhaps triple that, we might be getting close to the sort of sums we need to fight this. The difficulty is with all planning applications is that the people we are fighting here are talking about a 1.5 billion investment they're hoping for, and it's presumably a return as well. So plus on top of that, so we're really talking about a sum of money. We're up to about 400,000, which is meaningless to them in total in terms of what they might want to put into, or even up to 1 million is nothing when you're talking about such huge sums of money. And we're also conscious that the fight is a continuous one. I don't know if Jonathan's here, but Jonathan did a fantastic. Jonathan Glancy, are you here, Jonathan? I don't see. I said he might come. Yeah, well, anyway, he led a fantastic campaign in Hadley against Tesco building on their allotments. And every time they lost, Tesco just went back and slightly redrew the car park and came back and tried again. And that went on for 20 years until finally it was kicked out. So we're very conscious that one of the reasons we're having a public meeting, we're talking to people here today, is that this is like pyramid selling. It's important that we're going out and saying, don't leave here and thinking that is a terrible thing that we're facing. Just go back and see if you can find 5 people that you can tell over a dinner party. You ought to help get involved in this, because this is really going to be a fight. And the fight is on our side and the resources are on the other side. Are there any other questions that somebody would like to? Yes.
Good evening. Thank you so much. My name is Henrietta Billings and I'm the director of Save Britain's Heritage, and we're part of this coalition and part of the coordinating battle front. But I wanted to say, first of all, I really enjoyed the presentations and thank you very much. And this call for funding is extremely important. I also wanted to just point out that we are in a situation where it's a live planning application. So now is also the moment to be submitting your comments and, most importantly, your objections. And what I can't emphasize enough is that if you are wanting to object to this planning application, you must write in the first line of your letter, I object. Because of new rules that were introduced over the last 5 years, if you don't actually write I object, it's not necessarily counted as a letter of objection. So it's very important. And I wonder if it might be possible to circulate the planning reference number so that everybody can use that in their letters, because the number of letters of objection are very, very important in terms of helping to influence the decision. If everybody here could write a short letter objecting to the planning application, it would be a huge help to the campaign. And I can't really emphasize that enough. And I hope that people may be able to get the details of how to do that today.
If anyone wants to do, I hope you all will want to do that and do that. If you visit the Victorian Society website, there's a guide both to writing an objection and all the links and references that you need.
Is there a timescale, Joe?
I think the deadline is the 30th of November, so it's
Right.
quite tight.
So it's something to do today when you get home, if you can, to help us out. But do go to the Victorian Society. I filled it in. It's really quite harmless and I needed guidance. So what's important is to make sure that you have a look there, because it tells you the sort of things that will count. What's clear, and there are a lot of, I always divide this into two things, but both of them are very important. There's heart involved in a fight like this. There's real feeling, and that's really important because we have to spread the word. It wasn't until we've done a lot of Joe has done a lot of things, and Maria's done a lot of things. We've organised letter to the Times, and that did spread the word. We've put it on Instagram, and we have 70,000 followers on Instagram, and a colossal number of people, up to 20,000, sort of said, yeah, something's got to be done about this. Now, if those 20,000 people would actually sit down and write an objection, that would really make a difference. But if they also tell other people, and we use the feeling about this, that is what political action is about. It's not until the corporation feels slightly shamefaced about what they might be doing here, or a politician, particularly Michael Gove, thinks there's a real wave of people who genuinely believe that this is a wrong thing to do, that he will step forward and say, yeah, I'll call this one in. Now, that did happen with Save brilliantly over Oxford Street, and it really had an effect there, I think. And so it's not an example that is without success. Any other questions? Yeah. Just here, just down here. Do you have a microphone? Thank you.
Unfortunately, I hate to, after your wonderful explanation for everything, unfortunately, we had a very unfortunate thing happen at near the British Museum last week. It was past this huge tower, which in fact you will see from the south of the river over the top of Somerset House. If you're looking into the city, it is ruinous for Bloomsbury. Sorry, I got really upset about it because some very wonderful people like you 50 years ago in Covent Garden, you probably know them, Jim Moynihan and everyone were fighting very eloquently. It was the same thing. There is a great deal of money garnered somewhere else. The fact I'd like to ask is, what is the City of London getting out of this? Because Camden Council wasn't just getting a backhander quietly, a front-hander of 7 million was on the table.
Yeah, this is
That's hard for them to turn down.
Yeah, this is Selkirk House.
Turn it down.
This is Selkirk. What?
Is it? Has this got?
This is Selkirk House, isn't it? Do you mean?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And Selkirk House, I went myself to speak, and it's a sort of the idea that there is already an oversized skyscraper there, and the people who bought it said, we can't possibly just refurbish this skyscraper. You must allow us to put another 10 stories on top of it.
But you know, there's going to be 120 rooms in this tower. 100 of them do not have natural light. Anyway, I really wish you well, and thank you.
But I think
explaining that also beautifully. But I think we've really got to fight these things. There's a very nasty turn from the 1980s when there was so much creative work going on with conservation. It's now we're very easily trashed.
It's very true. I'll just pick up on that. I think obviously the scheme is playing into the city's desire to, as Rhys mentioned, build all these towers, become the destination, the place where all work should be focused, drawing it in from Canary Wharf. But Connor, you met with one of the councillors, didn't you? And I think, and can you remember what he said? There's also schemes to help. It's paying for schemes for local children as well. I think that's one of the carrots that they're using. Can you remember what that?
Yes, I met Alderman Zaman, who is one of the aldermen for Bishopsgate, and quite a while ago now, and we discussed some of the things. But yes, there is various sort of public benefits, comparatively small, I think, in the grand scheme when we look at 1 million square foot of office space, and it is things like the Sky Garden, the swimming pool, various things like that, which really pale, I think, in significance compared to everything else.
Yes, sir. Do we have a microphone down here? Oh, sorry, we're just there. Yes.
Can I, just in terms of further information relating to the scheme, can I ask Has TfL and or Network Rail entered into a development agreement with Sellar at this stage? Because it would be quite unusual for them to get to the stage of submission of a planning application with all the costs that goes with that without such a development agreement, which I think you would find enormously interesting. And then secondly, if such a development agreement has been entered into, what steps do you believe have been taken lawfully to procure that, the selection of Sellar as the developer? Because ODU has gone since the 1st of January 2021 on Brexit. However, the UK still does have public procurement rules which apply to it. One would imagine would apply to this instance, very much so.
Well, I raised this issue with Network Rail and they basically didn't give a clear answer at all. And so in one of the kind of freedom of information requests, I kind of tried to get to the bottom of what exactly was the relationship between Sellar and Network Rail, because obviously there is a very long-standing relationship there, having developed both London, the Shard at London Bridge and the Paddington Cube. And I questioned, well, this is an extremely harmful project. Why wasn't it put out to public competition to see who could achieve the stated goals with a view to get without harming heritage in this way? And Network Rail basically just refused to answer. And I think the freedom of information request I did in it, they say it was too commercially sensitive to be able to give me the information.
Connor, can you put the microphone there, because we didn't quite catch the last bit there. Sorry.
Sorry, I'll repeat. I think it probably is worth pursuing the question to what extent public procurement rules have been complied with. For if they have not been, then now is the time to make that point most vigorously. And you may well possibly get the decision turned over if there's been an illegal procurement of public works.
Well, it's certainly a point that that recognises that much of the future struggle is a legal one. And it's important, if we go to inquiry, to have legal arguments which are going to stand us in good stead. Getting to that inquiry is also, though, part of the right numbers who have objected and the right numbers of people who've supported this cause. I'm sorry, was there anybody else who wanted to add? Yes, sorry. Yep, sir.
I just wanted to ask a question as a commuter, and I've been commuting 40 years, and I was disrupted on the last lot of changes, which were, yeah, very difficult, because obviously we had to keep getting off at Stratford and then coming into London from there. On the plans, well, on the pictures that I've seen, there's all this talk of pedestrianising Liverpool Street itself, the actual road. Have you seen any plans? And are they actually going to do that? Because then what happens to the bus terminus? And what happens to all the taxis that their livelihood in Liverpool Street? Where do they all go? Because there is nowhere else. So all the people who use the buses like I do, all the people who use the taxis, what happens to them? You can't really see on the plans, and I don't know if you've actually seen what they intend to do for the actual commuters who have to use it every day.
Well, I don't know if you've looked at the planning application, but there are hundreds and hundreds of documents. So currently our focus is beyond heritage, but I think that's my understanding, as Guy might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, that they are intending to pedestrianise Liverpool Street itself. But yes, the details of where those facilities might be moved to, I'm not sure. Guy, I don't know if you've spotted anything there.
So the bus station will stay where it is at the moment, and could you remind me what the other facility? Yeah, so Sun Passage is the road that the buses currently use, and that will remain open. It will be Liverpool Street, the sort of small road in front of the hotel, which will be pedestrianised, so the roads will still run.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. I think that's a very good point. But looking at this plan in detail is part of what the process is in terms of objecting to its efficacy. I mean, as we know, at the moment they're claiming that they're making an all singing, all dancing railway station, but in fact, what the real concentration is on building nearly 1 million square feet of office space, which would also cause problems for buses and taxis and all the rest, one imagines. However, as we look forward, I don't want people to feel, as a result of hearing the costs, hearing the difficulties that have happened with Selkirk House, that the extraordinary long journey, we are also conscious, as we stand here, that there are successes, that Smithfield was a success, that Oxford Street was a success, and that these journeys may seem long, tortuous, and extremely difficult to get going, but they actually do result in good fortune. I did restoration, and people walked away from restoration. I remember that program thinking that all those buildings had been destroyed. In fact, 94% of the buildings that we featured on restoration went on to be restored, and they were restored and brought back to life by dedicated teams. So the idea of dedication is really important to these things, and I'm so pleased to see so many people here. Sir, can we come to you because you've been waiting? I'm sorry.
Yes, I'd like to build on that actually, on the idea of success. My name is Christian Wommer. I wrote a book called Cathedrals of Steam, which is about the 12 mainline railway stations, which mostly were built between 1838 and 1874, and they virtually all survived, with the exception of Broad Street. And I looked at the kind of battles over there. Of course, Euston was lost, or in that sense that the station was demolished, and we got that monstrosity that has replaced it. And there's another battle over Euston at this very moment. But then, because of that, and because of John Betjeman kind of campaigning, St Pancras was won, and that was really important. That you know, can you imagine without St Pancras? And can you imagine that Gothic wonder, which is actually not my favourite station? I prefer King's Cross next door, but that's another matter. It's at least it's kind of survived, and that is wonderful, and has been repurposed brilliantly. And then, of course, Liverpool Street was, John Betjeman kind of contributed to the design of Liverpool Street, and he actually you know, changed the agenda. And so we've had some great station redevelopments, you know, like London Bridge, like the improvements to Paddington, and improvements to King's Cross. These have all been great successes. So, you know, this can be one, and you, Griff, can be, you know, today's John Betjeman.
Well, very well. Luckily, I mean, one of the only reasons that I'm here is because I became involved in the Victorian Society a while back, being a publicity person, and I went out, didn't I, to sort of you know, be out there. I'm still out there with the endangered buildings and all that sort of stuff because for one reason or another I can get on ITV Breakfast. You know, that sort of thing is useful because it does help to spread gradually. What's been very heartening about this is that most people are agreed that what Network Rail are trying to do here is really a step too far. I mean, this is not improving the Liverpool Street Station, it's trashing Liverpool Street Station. It's very important to know that Historic England and Duncan Wilson have registered the strongest objection to this development. This is not, they haven't printed it yet or brought it forth, but Duncan Wilson has already said, we have the strongest objection to this. And he makes it very plain that in his written preliminary that they believe at Historic England that the benefits to the passenger are not in any way the same as the work that's been done at St Pancras and King's Cross. This is a completely different kettle of fish, and none of the benefits that they're claiming are justified by the work and the terrible precedent of the effect on the conservation area and on listed buildings. And so we really believe at this stage that our biggest hope is that it's called in pretty quickly. Obviously, there'll be an interim period, and obviously they'll be waiting to see what happens with the corporation at one level. But I get the feeling that we must just keep this pressure up. And we've had the Evening Standard here tonight. I've been speaking on the BBC at the station. We've been taking photographs tonight, just because I'm a shameless publicity bunny and I've got out and done that stuff. But that is what we need to do, is we need to seek ways of bringing this to people's attention as much and as often as we can. And which is why we're so grateful to all of you for coming here tonight and joining us and hearing what we've had to say. And how important it is for everybody to go out, if they possibly can, and bring another 3 or 4 people into the fold. Yes.
Into various planning applications, and one of the main ones which is now in the market is the large Allen and Overy building, which they've exactly said it's been up for 22 years. And as Allen and Overy are now leaving to come to the other side of Liverpool Street in the new development there, they cannot rent this huge building, which is practically half of Bishop Square. And so they want to either knock it down, renovate it, or, but if they renovate it, they want to put in a sort of an apex type shape through the building from one side of the square right the way through to Spitalfields Market, full of retail shops. But for that, they need 1 or 2 extra stories on top, which in that part of the market is really unacceptable.
Yes.
So we have problems with that as well. What we do generally at one of the is to help people write letters in, is to have a list of 10 objections, so that we do the same with licensing when there are too many, there's a CIZ zone. So we don't want any more bars opening up in the middle in the market and just having a sort of nighttime economy and no shops and no interesting things going on. So I was wondering if, because yes, we know about the heritage, and it's wonderful because you've done a great job, and it's really, I've learned a lot. But I do think it would be helpful for everyone other than us, perhaps, who are doing these things often. There are people who just don't know what to write. And what are we objecting to? You just can't say, I don't like the building. I don't
No, indeed. So one of the things that, yes. So this is one of the things that Joe was explaining, is that if you go to the Vic, there's a very solid list of 10 things that you should say, and that is there. And it is very useful to seek that guidance before you put pen to paper, because there are, as we've heard from Susan, as we've heard from other people in the audience, this is a legal battle. And people need that. A planning officer, if he wants to reject it, and he may do, needs to know that the objections he's received are solid and well-founded and founded in law, and not just, I don't like what people are doing here. Because I know from publicizing this thing, there are loads and loads of people who don't like the idea of it, but we need to help people to understand how they can use that emotion to turn it into a proper objection. Yeah, thank you. What do we do? Yep. So is it true, Marie, that on the flyer there is one of those strange things you point your phone at?
Yes,
is that right?
That's right. So it's at the back of the room. So if you scan one of those, the QR code on that, it will take you to various things, including various bits on our website, which will
Great.
be able
Somebody's
to-
holding it up there at the
Yeah.
back, but do we have some to take away?
Yes, yes,
We do. So if if you get hold of one of those, and just point your phone at it, and it'll basically hold your hand to write that objection and put your voice down.
Yeah, if you get in contact with us, yes. Yeah, if you get in contact with us, yeah.
Everyone is working there, going drinking there, attend to working in the
Yep.
spirit.
Our current flyer, I should explain, advertises this. So we probably need another flyer or a modified flyer to put it out saying, you want to object, here is how you do it. Yeah, but I think that's very good advice.
I'm conscious, Griff, that we've actually come to the end of our time here. So maybe we can have a very extremely quick fire, like 1 sentence questions, and we can do rapid fire if there's anyone, but it has to be extremely short because I'm conscious that we've run out of time.
If Network Rail is so short of money, why don't they dispose of the derelict site of Bishopsgate? It's been derelict for 46 years, and it's been a scab on the landscape for 80 years, which is all my life. I've been passing it almost daily.
Well,
that site is worth.
It's complicated to make suggestions to Network Rail about how it's a bit like the church commissioners. They're quite complicated people because they think they're doing the right thing. After having played with all this for so long, I wonder whether the corporation could be encouraged to buy Liverpool Street Station and look after it in the same way that it looks after various other things. But you're quite right. Network Rail, I think, are £57 billion in debt at the moment. And it rises by 3 or 4 billion every year, but they're not hurrying to sort of divest themselves of property. But anyway.
Excuse me. Has the Mayor of London been involved in any of this?
Well, you mean the Mayor of Greater London or the Lord Mayor of London? No, I think, well, the corporation is independent of the Mayor of London, which is why one of the reasons why the Greater London Council sort of opposed this building first, because they're two separate entities. Now, the Lord Mayor is brand new. He came into Mr. Mainelli. He became Lord Mayor, I think, 3 days ago, and I think a series of letters to him saying, is this what you want your legacy as Lord Mayor to be? He is the alderman of Broad Street, which is literally next door. So he's literally sort of on the edge of this. And I think writing to that Lord Mayor will be very important. But I think it's also true to see what Transport for London say about this. But I'm afraid I think they have skin in the game.
Yeah, exactly. Transport for London are involved in the scheme because it improves access from the station into the tube station. So they're standing to benefit. So I think that's probably why the Mayor of Greater London has been so quiet. But I did invite him and his Deputy Mayor for Transport to the event tonight, and I didn't get a response.
Lots of exits from the tube station are closed outside peak time. So TfL could actually alleviate the overcrowding and the bottlenecks within the mainline station if only they open their exits at all times.
Oh, well, I'd like to also make a final point just before we go, which is that I went to find out how bad the overcrowding in Liverpool Street Station was during a rush hour. And I have to say that the only point where you confronted a queue was at the bottom of the escalator out of the brand new Elizabeth line. So the brand new Elizabeth line has been created in the last 20 years or 10 years or whatever, and is actually not functioning properly because they didn't put enough escalators in or allow enough people to get up onto Liverpool Street Station. The rest of Liverpool Street Station, I can assure you, in the middle of the busiest rush hour, actually functions quite well. Thank you very much for coming tonight.